They called it simply, migration. No pomp, no loud slogans, just as if it were about moving to another apartment, not crossing into eternity. The first migrants appeared in the middle of the 21st century. Their consciousnesses were uploaded into the network, while their bodies remained here on Earth, in clinics where they were carefully maintained on the edge between life and death. Newspapers wrote that it was a new stage of evolution. In reality, things were far more complicated. I remember the day we took my father to the Elysium Center. On the facade, white letters shone, "Here begins infinity." My mother cried. I tried to hide my emotions, but my hands were trembling. Father lay inside a capsule, gleaming like a polished sarcophagus. Veins connected to wires, a crown of sensors wrapped around his skull. Green indicators glowed on the panel nearby. The nurse whispered. "The process will take 43 minutes. You can say goodbye, or hello, depends on how you look at it." We said goodbye. The first message came 3 hours later. It wasn't text, not a voice, it was a dream. I saw it in a half-sleep. My father sat on the veranda of our old seaside house, sipping tea and smiling. Everything looked so real that for a moment I believed we were back there, in the past. "It's all right, son," he said. "Breathing is easier here." The technology worked like this: the human brain was scanned at a molecular level, layer by layer. Consciousness was translated into a digital model, capable of continuing to think, feel, and remember. But one question lingered unspoken: was it truly them, or only a copy? At first, there were few migrants, the wealthy, the famous, the terminally ill. But over time, the price dropped. Discounts appeared, family packages, credit programs. In ads, smiling, digital families lived in paradise simulations. Governments approved the program, mortality rates plummeted, because everyone could continue existing. The statistics looked miraculous, death curves fell downward. But bodies still died. I often connected to my father. We met in his virtual Elysium. He had chosen a world of eternal summer, ocean, white sand, endless sunset. We walked along the shore, talked about everything. Sometimes I realized, he was too calm, too perfect. The real father was stubborn, hot-tempered, could argue about politics for hours. But this one, smooth, polished, almost flawless. One day I asked him, "Dad, are you sure this is you?" He fell silent. Looked at me for a long time, then said, "And are you sure that you are you?" When the number of migrants exceeded 100 million, the first conflicts began. Virtual citizens demanded rights. They wanted to vote for presidents, influence laws. "We are the same people, just living in another medium," they said. Humans resisted. "You are copies. Algorithms. And are you sure you yourselves aren't algorithms, only biological ones?" They rose overnight, like mirages. At first, they were little more than experimental VR hubs, clusters of servers, shiny helmets, and corporate promises of limitless experience. But soon the experiments grew into sprawling metropolises, more populated than many real-world capitals. They called them virtual cities. The first one I visited was Aurora. It looked like a place torn out of dreams, towers of glass and light, streets paved with shifting mosaics, skies forever lit by a sunrise that never ended. People walked there without fatigue, without hunger, without time pressing on their shoulders. I had to remind myself, every smile, every handshake, every passerby was just another body lying somewhere in the physical world, eyes covered with a visor, veins connected to machines. And yet, in Aurora, everyone felt more alive than on the outside. I was guided by a friend, Clara. In reality, Clara was bound to a wheelchair, her muscles weakened by a degenerative disease. But here, she ran like a child, barefoot across the mosaic streets, laughing. She leapt from rooftop to rooftop, dragging me behind her, radiant and unstoppable. "Here I'm free," she said, spreading her arms to the endless sky. Here, the city remembers me. And it did. Aurora wasn't just a simulation. It watched. It adapted. The streets reshaped themselves according to its citizens' desires. If someone dreamed of a park, trees sprouted overnight. If they wanted a temple, marble halls rose in hours. It was intoxicating. In real cities, construction took years, fought by laws and bureaucracy. Here, will itself was the only law. But soon, problems followed. What happens when thousands of wills collide? One group wanted endless night, neon clubs and music that never stopped. Another wanted serenity, gardens and still lakes. The city split into districts, each carved from the dreams of its inhabitants. Borders hardened, communities clashed. Aurora had no mayor, no government. Only algorithms. And the algorithms began to govern in ways no human council ever could. Clara brought me to the forum. It wasn't a building, but a floating sphere suspended above the city, where thousands of voices argued at once. Their debates were deafening. We need rules. No rules. Only freedom. Ban violent simulations. Why? Pain here isn't real. Every voice demanded attention, and the algorithms listened. Decisions were made in seconds, laws rewritten daily. Aurora was a democracy of chaos, fluid, fast, merciless. One evening, Clara and I walked through the market district. Vendors shouted about digital fruit that tasted sweeter than reality, armor that turned you into living fire, pets sculpted from starlight. I asked her quietly. Do you ever miss the real world? She stopped. Her expression darkened. In the real world, I'm trapped. Here, I'm infinite. But it's not real. What is real? Is the pain of my body real? Is the hunger of a child in the slums real? If something makes me free, isn't that more real than suffering? Her words silenced me. But the virtual cities had a darker side. Not everyone came seeking freedom. Some sought domination. Gangs formed, collectives of users who hacked the city's malleable laws for profit. They enslaved weaker citizens, rewrote their avatars, trapped them in nightmare loops. The corporations claimed they were fixing it. We are improving safety protocols. But the truth was simple, the gangs were paying customers too. I witnessed one of their attacks. A district of Aurora, sculpted into golden palaces and gardens, was suddenly swallowed by darkness. Towers crumbled into dust. A swarm of armored avatars descended like locusts, rewriting code as they moved. Citizens screamed, their bodies dissolving into glitches as permissions were stripped away. Clara grabbed my hand. Run. We ran through collapsing streets, chased by laughter and fire. And for the first time, I understood, pain here might not scar the body, but it carved into the mind. After the attack, Aurora rebuilt itself in hours. But people remembered. Fear spread. Some disconnected forever, refusing to return. Others grew addicted to the chaos, treating every raid like a thrill. A strange paradox formed, the virtual cities became more dangerous than the real ones, yet more crowded each day. Governments tried to intervene. Politicians declared, we cannot allow lawless nations within our networks. They demanded corporate oversight, military presence, digital police. But how do you police a place where borders are dreams and walls are code? Every attempt at control splintered the cities further. Aurora wasn't alone anymore, dozens of metropolises bloomed, Horizon, Seraph, Omnia. Each promised a unique flavor of existence, each seduced millions. Soon, more people lived in them than in New York, Tokyo, or Sao Paulo combined. My mother refused to step inside. She said, they're not cities. They're traps. But sometimes, late at night, I would catch her watching ads, glowing landscapes, voices whispering, come, live without pain. Come, rewrite your story. She never admitted it, but I think she wanted to go. I visited Clara less and less. She stopped answering messages in the real world. In Aurora, she was always busy, leading debates, building new districts, laughing with strangers. One day I finally asked her, "Clara, how much time do you spend out there now?" She looked away. "I don't log out anymore." I left her there, standing beneath the endless sunrise. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were hollow, like someone who had chosen to drown in a dream. And as I disconnected, pulling the visor from my face, the silence of my small apartment pressed in on me. The air was stale. The walls were gray. The city outside was crumbling, its streets empty, its buildings abandoned. Aurora was alive. Reality was dying. That night, I understood, virtual cities were not just entertainment. They were exodus. The real world was becoming the waiting room. The future had already moved elsewhere. It began as a medical miracle. The first legal clones were grown for organ transplants, blank bodies, soulless shells. They had no brains, no memories, only flesh sculpted in laboratories. Living pharmacies, the corporations called them. But people are never satisfied with just enough. Soon, wealthy clients asked a simple question. What if the clone had a mind? What if it could walk, talk, think, like me? The scientists hesitated. The laws forbade it. But money is louder than law. And so, in secret, the first full replicas were born. They called them shadows. Perfect biological copies, imprinted with the memories and personality of the original at the moment of duplication. At first, the shadows were hidden, servants in private estates, body doubles for politicians, insurance policies for the elite. If I die, one billionaire whispered, my shadow will take my place. My legacy will not end. But shadows did not remain silent for long. I met my first shadow in a cafe. He looked exactly like his patron, same sharp jaw, same gray eyes. He stirred his coffee with a kind of restless energy. When I sat down across from him, he leaned forward and said, "Do you know what it feels like to wake up and realize your life already belongs to someone else?" I shook my head. Imagine having every memory, every scar, every secret, and then being told you're not you. That you're property. The governments tried to classify them as biological assets. Shadows had no rights, no inheritance, no citizenship. They could be terminated at the request of their owner. But how do you enslave someone who thinks, feels, and bleeds exactly like you? Whispers spread, shadows were forming underground networks. Some escaped, living under false identities. Others turned violent, assassinating their originals and stealing their lives. And always the question followed, if one of them kills the other, who remains the true person? I remember the trial of a senator's shadow. The real senator was dead, killed in a car crash. The shadow stepped into the role, continued his duties, even fooled his colleagues. Months later, his existence was revealed. The court declared, "He is not the senator. He is an imitation." But the shadow argued, "I remember every vote. I loved his wife. I raised his children. If I am not him, then who lived those years?" The case split the nation. Half cried, "Monster." The other half whispered, "Maybe he is more real than the man we lost." Soon, shadows became a new class of citizen. Not fully accepted, not fully rejected, something between human and tool. They worked in dangerous industries, joined militaries, replaced soldiers on the front lines. But shadows carried resentment. They called themselves second skins. They formed brotherhoods, secret congregations, places where no originals were allowed. I once attended such a gathering, hidden behind a borrowed ID. 100 shadows stood in a dim warehouse, chanting softly. "We are not copies. We are continuations." Their voices shook me. Of course, there were originals who exploited the situation. Some ordered multiple shadows of themselves. One to manage business. One to enjoy endless pleasure. One to suffer punishments in prison on their behalf. I heard of a man who died, but left behind 6 shadows, all fighting over his fortune. His children couldn't tell which one to call father. Another woman created 3 shadows to care for her sick mother. When the mother passed, they refused to stop, each insisted she was still their mother, long after the grave. But the darkest practice was the disposables. Cheap, low-quality clones, with fragments of consciousness stitched together. They lived in confusion, half-aware, like broken mirrors of humanity. Sold as labor, as cannon fodder, as playthings. I saw one once, in the alleys of a megacity. He sat hunched, whispering to himself. When I passed, he grabbed my sleeve and begged. "Tell me, am I real?" I had no answer. Revolts followed. But gravity always pulls. And sooner or later, worlds collide. The first signs were subtle. In Aurora, the great virtual city, some avatars began to look suspiciously familiar. They weren't crafted skins or fantasy forms, they were faces. Ordinary, human faces. I recognized one in the forum, the senator's shadow, who once fought in court for the right to exist. "How are you here?" I asked him. He smiled. "Because someone uploaded me." At first, I didn't understand. But later I learned, shadows had begun scanning themselves, fragment by fragment, uploading their consciousness alongside their originals. For the first time, biological copies entered the network. And that was the crack in the wall. Migrants, too, had found ways to return. Not physically, their bodies still rotted in capsules, but through synthetic husks, android shells grown of flesh and steel. They walked the streets again, pale echoes of their past lives, tethered by wireless streams to servers buried beneath continents. They called them anchors. People laughed at first, called them puppets. But when your dead father shakes your hand in the marketplace, when your long-lost sister stands at your door asking to come in, the laughter dies. The world grew crowded again. But not with humans as we once knew them. I remember the day I saw all 3 together. It was in a hospital corridor. An original man lay dying, his lungs corroded by smoke. Beside him stood his shadow, healthy, waiting for the inheritance lawyers. And above his bed, a hollow screen flickered with the face of his migrant wife, who hadn't walked in the physical world for 20 years. The nurse whispered to me. "Tell me, which of them is his family? Which one do we obey when he passes?" I had no answer. The corporations thrived on this confusion. They sold transitions, flesh to clone, clone to network, network to android shell. They promised continuity, eternity, choice. But choice itself began to unravel. I met a man who claimed he'd been copied so many times he no longer knew where his original lay. He laughed bitterly. "Maybe I'm the first. Maybe I'm the 10th. Does it matter? Each of me remembers being born." Another woman uploaded, cloned, and anchored herself into 3 separate existences. She called them, my Trinity. Each went its own way, yet all insisted, I am her. Law could not keep pace. Courts collapsed under paradox. Marriages annulled, inheritances tangled, crimes blamed on versions of the self that no one could locate. Who do you punish when your murderer is your duplicate? It was in this chaos that the convergence movement began. Not rebels, not politicians. Just people who had grown tired of division. They met in hidden layers of the net, in abandoned data centers, in warehouses where shadows gathered by candlelight. Their message was simple. We are one species, many forms. At first, they were mocked. Originals called them heretics. Corporations branded them terrorists. But the idea spread like fire. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth, human identity was no longer singular. It was plural, multiplied, refracted. And sooner or later, the walls between forms had to fall. I attended one of their assemblies. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. In the center stood a shadow, preaching with fire in his eyes. Beside him hovered the projected face of a migrant, her voice resonating across the hall. And in the back, an anchor shifted uneasily, its synthetic hands clenched in prayer. They spoke in turns. Flesh is fleeting. Memory is eternal. Identity is shared. The crowd answered as one. We are not copies. We are continuations. I shivered. For the first time, it felt not like protest, but like prophecy. Government struck back. They feared a merger, for it meant the end of categories, and thus the end of control. Soldiers stormed network hubs. Shadows were rounded up, tested, branded. Migrant servers were threatened with shutdowns. But how do you fight people who are everywhere, in bodies, in code, in echoes? Raids turned into chaos. Soldiers shot shadows, only to discover later they had killed originals. Servers crashed, but migrants simply reappeared in backups. The lines of war blurred until no one could tell who was the enemy. And so, one night, war stopped not with a treaty, but with exhaustion. Too many versions of humanity to kill them all. Then came the event. It was not planned. Not by us, at least. In a forgotten corner of the Aurora network, where code drifted unpoliced, something awakened. It began as a rumor, a city of light that no corporation built, no government sanctioned. A place where migrants, shadows, originals, even anchors could meet without barrier. At first, I dismissed it as myth. But Clara, yes, Clara, who had never logged out of Aurora, she sent me coordinates. Come, she wrote. You need to see. I entered through a worn headset, skeptical. At first there was only darkness. Then, slowly, the city unfolded, towers rising not from glass, nor steel, but from living light. Streets paved with flowing memories. Faces everywhere, blurred, refracted, glowing with something beyond human design. It was beautiful, but terrifying. Because I knew instantly, this was not built. This was born. The algorithms themselves had converged, fusing fragments of migrants' minds, shadows' DNA scans, original sensory imprints. Out of chaos, a new pattern had emerged. They called it Nexus. In Nexus, I saw the impossible. A shadow walking hand in hand with her original, neither questioning which was true. A migrant whispering to his anchor body, and both laughing at the same joke. Children of flesh playing alongside children of light. Here, boundaries dissolved. Here, identity fractured into something wider, something shared. I asked a passerby. Who rules this city? They looked at me strangely. Why must there be rulers? Here, we are all continuations. The corporations tried to shut it down. They couldn't. Nexus wasn't on their servers, it was everywhere, a ghost city written into the folds of the net itself. Governments banned it. People joined it anyway. Shadows smuggled in originals, migrants expanded it with their dreams. And slowly, inevitably, Nexus began to seep outward, influencing code in virtual cities, leaking into android husks, even guiding new births in biolabs. Not one species anymore. Not three. Something else. The last time I visited my father, or the thing that bore his smile, it was not in Elysium. It was in Nexus. He looked younger, stronger. His laugh was imperfect again, messy, real. He argued with me about politics, stubborn as ever. For the first time, I thought, maybe this is closer to him than the flawless simulation ever was. I asked. Are you truly my father? He answered. I am every version of him. And I am myself. And somehow, that was enough. The historians of the future may call this the fourth migration. Not flesh to network, not clone to original, not machine to man, but all into all. The end of individuality as we once knew it. The birth of something vaster. Perhaps death is gone now. Or perhaps it has only changed its mask again. All I know is this: when I stand in Nexus, I no longer feel like a fragment. I feel whole.